Hello everyone, welcome to Altium Academy. I'm your host, Zach Peterson. Today, we're going to be talking about how to set up your design rules for VIA in PAD. We're gonna look at a viewer question, and I'm gonna show you how to set this up inside Altium Designer. So make sure to hop into your copy of Altium and follow along. Let's get started. Now, before we get started talking about design rules for VIA in PAD, let's take a look at that viewer question. Sick Glory Transit writes, can you please explain how to make design rules specific to VIA in PAD? For example, minimum annular ring, hole size, etc. There seems to be no query that ever applies to VIAs of this type. You are correct, Sick Glory Transit. There is no query that you would use to set up VIA in PAD. Because there is no VIA in PAD object in Altium Designer, there are only VIAs. And the design rule engine operates off of the placement location that you have in the PCB layout. So what I'm gonna do is show you where to find all of those design rules in the PCB rules and constraints editor, what values to use, and that will set you up with everything you need to use VIA in PAD. After we do that, I'll show you how to fill and cap those VIAs, and you can do that in the properties panel by setting one of the IPC 4761 VIA types. So to show how to set this up inside of Altium Designer, I've opened up one of our 1-minute design review submissions, and we're going to take a look at what's happening underneath this BGA in order to show how the design rules work and what you will expect once those design rules are turned on or turned off. Now currently inside of this design, you can see here that we have a BGA and there's a bunch of VIAs around in the dogbone fan out, but we don't have any of those VIAs in PAD, as you can clearly see here on the screen. Here, if I go into the design and rules option from the top menu, I'm in the PCB rules and constraints editor. We can see here under the high speed section that there is an option for VIAs under SMD. I don't want to say anything negative about the devs at Altium because of course they've made an awesome program here, but I'm a little confused as to why the VIAs under SMD rule is under the high speed section. Personally, I would have put it under the manufacturing section, but hey, that's where it's at. So if you're wondering where it is, just check the high speed section. You'll be able to find this design rule. Now, as you can see here, there's actually no rule set up prohibiting or allowing VIA in PAD. Now, if I want to enable or disable VIA in PAD, what I need to do is click New Rule, and then I need to open up that new rule. Within this new rule, I can then allow VIAs in SMD pads, or I can disable VIAs in SMD pads. So first, let's just go back and delete this rule. And after we delete this rule, let's take a look at the layout and see what happens if I try to put a VIA in PAD. Let's take a look at this ground VIA, for example. Now here, we don't have any kind of VIA in PAD rule set up. If I just drag this VIA over, it allows me to put this VIA in PAD. And then if I run a design rule check, there's not going to be any DRC error triggered because I deleted that design rule. It doesn't exist in our rules and constraints. So if you don't have anything set up under the VIAs under SMD PAD design rule option, then it's not going to trigger any DRC error if you put a VIA in PAD. Let's undo this, and then let's go in here and add our VIAs under SMD rule. I'm going to click New Rule. I'm going to verify that the box is unchecked. We'll go ahead and hit OK. And now I'm going to try and drag this same VIA back underneath this pad. You can see here that I'm trying to drag the VIA underneath the pad, but unfortunately it doesn't let me place it in the pad. So this rule allows you to prohibit VIA in PAD. Now you won't accidentally set VIA in PAD when you're doing your routing. Now what if we want to allow VIA in PAD and we don't want to trigger any kind of design rule error? Well, now what we can do is go back into that design rule. I can go ahead and check that box. I'll hit OK. And now with that box enabled, I can then drag this VIA right underneath this pad, and we have a standard VIA in PAD placement underneath this BGA. This design rule becomes very important if you're going to do any of the automated BGA fan out. Now, in order to do VIA in PAD fan out automatically, you can go up here to the route and then fan out option from the top menu. And as long as you have that rule enabled in the PCB rules and constraints editor, you'll be able to do an automatic VIA in PAD fan out from the fan out tool. Now, what we just discussed applies to enabling or disabling VIA in PAD in your PCB layout, but as the viewer question suggests, there are additional design rules that we'll need in order to control our routing VIA styles. So let's go back into the PCB rules and constraints editor and see what other design rules we need. Here under the manufacturing section, we have two rules that we already need. and these were mentioned directly in the viewer question. The first is minimum annular ring, and then the second is hole size. Now, there's an additional design rule that you need when your designs get pretty dense, which is hole-to-hole clearance. And I use this one a lot on grounded coplanar waveguides where you have to cluster a lot of vias together in order to create high shielding effectiveness. So these are under the manufacturing section. Now, there's an additional design rule that is set up for routing, which is the routing via style. Now here, under routing via style, you can set up minimum and maximum allowed via sizes. And actually, as you can see here in this view, we have the default values set up. So normally what I do in order to control the via size, whether I'm using via in pad or standard routing, is I'll set my minimum and maximum and preferred values. And what you can do from this view is you can set up that minimum annular ring directly here inside of the PCB Rules and Constraints Editor from the Routing Vias section, rather than also setting up from the manufacturing section. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to set up my minimum and maximum values. For my minimum hole diameter, I usually set it to 8 mils because that's the limit for mechanical drilling. For maximum, I usually just leave it at the high end value. That's the default here, so 28 mils. And then for preferred, I'll usually set it at 10 or 12 mils. Here I'm going to set it at 10. Now what I can do in this design rule is I can actually build the minimum annular ring directly into this via style just by using these minimum and maximum values for the pad diameter. Now, for example, if I'm going to use this 8 mil via hole and I want to design this PCB to be IPC Class 3 compliant, I need to make sure that I have at least a 5 mil ring around that 8 mil hole in order to account for drill wander. So I would want to set my minimum via pad size to be 18 mils. Similarly, for the preferred size of 10 mil via hole diameter, I would want to set 20 mils for the via pad diameter. By setting these values in the via design rule, it's going to automatically place those via sizes whenever I'm doing my routing and I decide to drop a via while changing a layer. Now, if the only holes I had in this PCB were via holes, this would basically cover every hole in the design. But unfortunately, you could also have through holes, you could have mounting holes, and in those cases, we would need an additional design rule in order to cover the hole size and the minimum annular ring. That's where we come down to these manufacturing rules. Here inside the manufacturing rules, we have a hole size and we have a minimum annular ring. These values can also be used to check against minimum annular ring sizes that are needed for all of the different holes in your design. Now, if we were to size our vias such that we had a leftover pad size that was smaller than the minimum annular ring, we would trigger a DRC error and we would need to go back and change the size of that via. Because the minimum annular ring rule and the hole size rule can overlap in scope with the via size rule, I would recommend setting up your via sizes such that it already complies with the IPC product class that you're trying to design. And that's basically everything that you need to design a PCB with via in pad. Thanks for sending in that awesome question. And of course, if you have any questions for us, make sure to leave your questions and comments in the comments section. Make sure to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and last but not least, don't forget to call your fabricator, folks. We'll see you next time.